reading Many Lifetimes. It's a book, a collaboration between Joan Marshall Grant and Kelsey, and it describes them treating people with hypnosis in the way Dennis does it, which is the more traditional hypnosis, and the way Joan does it with her psychic abilities. I was in chapter 2. I had a little bit of a wobbly in the last reading, and the last sentence, in fact, was wobbly again. So this is Kelsey talking. It's the second chapter, and we're coming to the end of it. Clinically and intuitively, I had accepted their validity, which was surely justified by the results. But before I had had time to speculate upon how they could have been possible, the answer had arrived in my head. In a human being there must be an element which exists and is capable of function even in the absence of a physical body. The concept of such a non-physical component under one name or another must be as old as mankind, but it was tremendously exciting to have reached it for myself through a series of experiences which had been acceptable to my intellect. I felt as though I had arrived at a clearing in a forest from which paths could be seen to run in a variety of directions, promising to lead towards the answers to such questions as the relationship of mind to body, the nature of memory, and so on. But not surprisingly, a new question now presented itself. What is the origin of this component? It might be imagined that reincarnation dropped neatly into place as an entirely acceptable answer. But in fact, this was not the case. There were, I think, several reasons. Probably the most telling was my assumption that since the body was initiated by a contribution from each parent, the psyche, as I then called the non-physical component, would be formed in a similar way. This error caused me to misinterpret my patient's reliving of their conception, to the extent that I assumed she was reliving the meeting of the sperm and the ovum instead of, as I now believe was the case, the moment when her personality contacted the fertilized egg. I had in fact a mental picture of half-psyches bestriding the germ cells like jockeys. However, artificial insemination made this difficult to sustain. I could not imagine several million half-psyches, each perched precariously on a sperm, waiting in a bottle in a refrigerator until some operator gave them the off. On the other hand, I could not see a really acceptable alternative. It was undeniable that children inherited physical characteristics from their parents, and I still assumed, mistakenly, that certain traits of personality for which the body could not be held responsible were also inherited. The idea of a long personal history was obscured from me by Jung's concept of the universal unconscious, which seemed so adequately to explain such phenomena as a man who had lived all his life in the depths of the country dreaming about the sea. During the next 6 years I encountered patients whose anxiety I still found myself unable to explain, even after the most exhaustive scrutiny of their life story, in terms of classical psychoanalytic theory. Such cases caused me to wonder whether it was possible for an individual to inherit anxiety from a parent, but it still did not cause me to think in terms of earlier lifetimes of his own. Thus, although my thoughts returned time and time again to the question of where the psyche had come from, the rigidity of my own thinking prevented me from making any satisfactory progress. Then, one evening, early in 1958, I was talking with a chance acquaintance, an aeronautical scientist, about extrasensory perception. I described to him an occasion when a patient who was deeply under hypnosis had apparently been able to project her mind to my home and to describe certain features of it with remarkable accuracy. Her first comment had been that there seemed to be a double hedge around it. In fact, the garden was enclosed by a hedge, inside which was a fence I had erected because the hedge was not thick enough to contain my boxer bitch. She then said, "There is a lawn in front of the house, and there are several small trees on it." This was accurate. I had recently planted some apple trees on this lawn, which was about the size of a lawn tennis court. Her next remark was surprising. "It is dark, and I cannot find my way into the house." I had overlooked the fact that this session was taking place late on a winter evening. Furthermore, the front door was recessed and set at an unusual angle. Several visitors had found it difficult to locate at night if the light above it had not been switched on. I had been impressed by this small experiment, but my acquaintance accepted it calmly, merely observing that he believed there had been errors when a great deal more had been known about such forms of perception than was the case today. He went on to tell me that the faculty my patient had displayed had been used in early dynastic Egypt, as we now use radar. He then asked me if I had read any books by Joan Grant. I replied that I had never heard of them, whereupon he told me that this author had the faculty of being able to recall many of her earlier lives, and that 7 of her books were, in fact, posthumous autobiographies. Such work had brought me. Such a faculty was far beyond the point to which my own work had brought me, but I felt a sense of great excitement, a sense that a door was about to open upon far more than merely the answer to a philosophical problem. Before I had finished Winged Pharaoh, the book I read first, I knew, beyond any possibility of doubt, that reincarnation was a reality. It would be futile to try to account for this feeling of certainty in terms of pure reason. Only later did intellect bridge the gap between my own researches and an intuitive conviction that I had been reminded of a fundamental pattern of evolution which I had long known to be true. I would have journeyed halfway round the world to meet the author, but fortunately such a long pilgrimage proved unnecessary. I soon learned that Joan was living only 30 miles away. I met her on the 14th of May. I came to dinner and left at 3 o'clock in the morning. Seldom can so many words have been exchanged in 8 hours. As I had anticipated, my experience with hypnosis linked with Joan's knowledge and experience of reincarnation as effortlessly as a river meets the sea. But as the autobiography of her present life covers only the period up to 1937, I did not know that during the war years she had worked closely with a psychiatrist and had acquired considerable psychiatric experience. This was an entirely unexpected bonus. It seemed to be absurd that the fullest possible use should not be made of her faculties, while she wished for nothing more than the opportunity to resume regular work in this field. So, before I left, we had already discussed tentative plans for working together. We neither of us foresaw that within 2 months we should have embarked upon life together also. So this is the end of chapter 2. Chapter 3 is the supra-physical body, and it is Joan Grant writing.